This is JadeCast, your gateway to traditional martial arts and Chinese culture. Brought to you by your host, Chef Jonathan Bluestein. Welcome back to JadeCast. This would be our second lecture on the podcast, and today I'd like to talk to you about something straight out of Confucianism. Confucianism, what the hell is that? Well, we talk a lot about things Chinese, but the philosophy of Confucianism doesn't get enough of stage time, And it's a shame because it is a beautiful philosophy that's worth knowing, and it's also very much related to all of traditional Chinese martial arts. And I am going to have a lot of lectures on JadeCast discussing Confucianism. But first, let's get to the point. What is this about? Well, Confucianism is named after Confucius, or as the Chinese know him, Kongzi. Now, this guy, Confucius, Kongzi, was a scholar and a philosopher and a teacher who lived roughly 500 years before Jesus Christ. And Confucius traveled all over China and had a large following of disciples, eventually 72 of them, or so the tradition says. And they traveled between the fractured Chinese landscape, which at the time had many different larger and smaller states ruled by various kings and sovereigns and emperors. And he attempted to help correct society by instilling virtue into the hearts of those rulers, by convincing them to be more virtuous in their actions, and by teaching people how to conduct themselves better with friends, with family, and with whomever they meet, actually. And by so doing, improve the quality of human life and relationships all over China. This is quite a unique individual, and he is held to be one of the greatest Chinese people to have ever lived. The Chinese people revere him to this day, and his ideas play a central role in Chinese culture. Now, I can't get too deeply into Confucianism. One thing I would like to say is that Confucius did not write much during his lifetime. Most of what he taught, he would teach verbally, orally, in lectures, and then his students would at times write it down. And that's how we got his philosophy all the way down to this day. And if you were to ask Confucius himself, he would tell you, oh, actually, I'm not that smart or innovative. I am simply attempting to deliver to you the message of the ancients. Because he was, in fact, a scholar who looked into older texts and ancient traditions that were many thousands of years old in Chinese culture, and translated these traditions or texts, or edited them. He edited quite a few books, and he tried to make those traditions and wisdoms more relevant to his time, much like in our time, a lot of people, and myself included, attempt to make Confucianism, his line of thinking and his teachings, more relevant to the world in which we ourselves live. So today, I would like to give you a snippet from Confucianism, which would be relevant to the martial arts. Granted, a lot of Confucianism is relevant to the martial arts, and like I said, I would speak more of this in later lectures. Now, the body of knowledge that's most well known in this bigger philosophy that's called Confucianism, which is a social philosophy. It's focused on human beings and how to be a better human being, would be called the Analects. What are the Analects? It's a relatively short book that has 499 sayings. At times, one of those 499 sayings could be just a single sentence or an exchange between 2 or 3 questions and answers, or sometimes it would be 2 or 3 short paragraphs. But overall, these tend to be very short discussions, and they're not necessarily in order. And it's a book that's, again, quite short. You could read it in a few short hours, but it contains a lot of wisdom. And the reason being that the Analects is essentially a summary of the core teachings of Confucius to his disciples that they have compiled and edited into this single book after he passed away. And it was passed down to us through the generations, and there was quite a lot in the Analects that is still very much relevant to our time. And this book, The Analects, plays a pivotal role in my own book, The Martial Arts Teacher, originally published in 2017. And in The Martial Arts Teacher, I use a lot of quotes from this book of Confucius, The Analects, to help illustrate how one could better teach the traditional martial arts, not just the traditional Chinese martial arts, and how to be a better human being. You can easily read this book, The Analects, yourselves. It's readily available on a website called Confucius.org, Confucius.org. Now, let me repeat that for you. Confucius.org. On that website, which is backed by some organization, perhaps even by the Chinese government, you can find a full translation of the Analects, as well as the Chinese origin in classical Chinese and modern Chinese. You can find in many languages, including English, German, French, Hebrew, you name it. I think there's even Arabic in there. So whichever your native language is, you can read it in it. And if you're bilingual or multilingual, all the better. That's wonderful, because then, like myself, for instance, I could read the translations both in Hebrew and in English, and also at times read some stuff in the Chinese and make comparisons. And it's very important, because remember, Confucius lived around 2,500 years ago, which is a long, long time ago, and his language and the manner in which he expressed himself is somewhat different to how we do it nowadays. But still, he was a human being and very much similar to ourselves. All right, so let me quote to you some short wisdom from the Analects. Confucius, first of all, I have to refer to a term that he uses here. He's going to use the term junzi. Junzi is a term that repeats itself a lot in the Analects and in Confucius's teachings. And junzi, it basically means the virtuous person. A person that cultivates virtue, that's a good human being, that treats others well. And a lot of this book, The Analects, talks about what are the qualities of such a person. Oftentimes, the term junzi has been translated into English as gentleman. Of course, it could also mean gentlewoman or a lady. And in some respects, many of the virtues that Confucius describes are parallel to our conception of who would be a gentleman in classical Western society. All right, so Confucius tells us in the Analects, and I'm sorry I didn't bring the exact quote here to this discussion today, but perhaps later, if you'd like to know where I took it from, I can give it to you exactly, which chapter in the Analects. So he says, when the junzi is like the North Star. When the junzi makes a mistake, everybody can see it. But when the junzi corrects his errors, everybody would look up. Let me repeat that. And again, it's not the exact direct quote, but it's close enough. So the Junzi is like the North Star. When he makes a mistake, everybody can see it. It's clear to see. But when he corrects his ways, corrects his errors, everybody looks up. So what does Confucius mean, and how does that relate to the martial arts? Well, if you are a Junzi, if people perceive you to be a gentleman and a virtuous person, then naturally people tend to look at you and wait to see whether you're gonna make a mistake. Because if you're so clean and virtuous and you're such a good person, naturally other people, even if they cheer for you, they think, oh, I wonder, like, is this guy gonna ever do something shady? Is that guy ever gonna cheat on his wife? Not pay his taxes? You know how that is in human society. And it's also the same when you are, say, a martial arts teacher. Because when you teach the martial arts, your students are always on the lookout to see if you're gonna make an error, you're gonna make a mistake. And when you do make a mistake and you are in this position of leadership, either the people naturally look up to you, or you are in this position of leadership, you are an elected representative, you're a martial arts teacher, you're the CEO of a company, it doesn't matter, then it's clear to see, right? Everybody would notice immediately because you are the Junzi. If someone who is just by nature and by habit a criminal is going to commit, another illegal act, it's just what that person does. But if you are a great leader, or people perceive you to be this more virtuous person, when you make a mistake, okay, so now you got people's attention. But here's the thing, here's what Confucius tells us, which is very wise, that the Junzi in that manner is like the North Star. So he's like this bright light in the sky that everyone notices. But when he corrects his ways, everybody would also look up. So essentially what Confucius is trying to say is that there is even more power in remedying your wrongful ways than there is in making the mistake to begin with, which is very, very important for us as human beings, and especially if we are in a position of leadership. And I remind you, I'm using a lot of that wisdom in my book, The Martial Arts Teacher, for that reason exactly. So I'll give you an example from my own personal and professional life. We've all made mistakes, and as a martial arts teacher, I have made many. Trust me on that. And some of the typical mistakes that martial arts teachers make with their students is that they hurt people's feelings. It happens. You cannot have relationships with dozens and hundreds and thousands of people over time without eventually hurting someone's feelings, whether it's your fault, their fault, or everybody's fault. It just happens. And a lot of the time, people feel, even if they're leaders, even if they're martial arts teacher, I don't feel like mending that sort of relationship. That's just a lost cause. Why should I even bother? Why should I do that? Everyone saw what happened. It's too late. That person's never gonna come back to class. Why do it even? But actually, if we think about this wisdom by Confucius, then we realize that there is more power in making that correction. Okay, in Hebrew we call this tikkun. Tikkun is fixing, is a core concept in Judaism also. The idea that you can fix a relationship, and in that mending of the relationship, there is great power. And Confucius was talking about this 2,500 years ago. So what happens? Imagine this. You're the martial arts teacher and you screwed up with that relationship. You hurt someone's feelings, but now you are going to bring forth that student, if you can, it's just one example, before all of the other students in class, and just the beginning of class, before everything else, and you're going to say, hey, you know what, I want to talk with you today before anything else, that we have Rob here, and recently in class, I said some things about Rob and I really hurt his feelings. And I would like to apologize. This was uncalled for. Rob is a good guy. Maybe we had our misunderstandings. Maybe there are various reasons. It doesn't matter. I had no right to hurt Rob's feelings. He is a good person and I respect him. And I want him and you to know that I sincerely regret what I did and that I think that Rob is a part of our community and I cherish him being so. If you as a martial arts teacher or leader or CEO, it doesn't matter. Rob could have been an employee in some company, not necessarily a student. If you were to go and do this, especially in front of other people, and you give that person face in front of other people, and you correct your ways, you know what's going to happen? It's going to happen exactly what Confucius said. You'd be like the North Star again, and everybody is going to look up. They are going to look up and receive a positive impression and be motivated to become better themselves. Now, this is a lesson that's very important, in my opinion, for us as martial arts teachers, but it's also an important lesson for us as human beings because you don't have to be a leader or a junzi for this to work, right? You can also make it work in a family, with family members, with friends. This is what we call in martial arts culture in China, wude. Wu is martial, de is virtue. Wude is martial virtue. So these virtuous moral ideas by Confucius are a part of traditional Chinese martial arts society. It's part of our heritage, and it's a wisdom we can all learn from, whether we are junzi, leaders, teachers, students, husbands, wives, mothers, brothers. It doesn't matter. It's relevant, very much so, to all of us. Now, this was a broader example from the Analects that I touched upon today. But in later lectures, once in a while, we're going to go back to Confucius and Confucianism and also to wisdom written and taught by his intellectual descendants over the centuries and see what we can get out of there. Thank you all so very much for listening. And if you are enjoying this podcast, please, by all means, feel free to visit the website of our international organization, Blue Jade. Blue Jade Martial Arts International, you can read more about on our website bluejadesociety.com. That's blue, like the color blue, jade, like the stone, the gemstone jade, society, like a society.com. You can also take a look at one of my interesting books that I have compiled and written and published over the years, among them Research of Martial Arts and The Martial Arts Teacher, which are readily available on all Amazon affiliated websites such as Amazon.com, Amazon.co.uk, Amazon.de, etc., etc. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch up with you next time.